And Dave.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a first for us. We're talking about a little something different today. It's called the flat Earth theory, more or less. And here's the question: are we inside of a Truman Show like world, only thousands of miles wide? And this is what we're going to be talking about today with our guest Mark Sargent. He grew up in South Whidbey Island, Washington, and Mark started his career playing computer games professionally. And from there, he spent the next 20 years training people in awesome software. And in 2014, he looked into what was no doubt the most ridiculous conspiracy ever, called the Flat Earth Theory, and through extensive research discovered that it wasn't so laughable after all. And early in 2015, he released a series of YouTube videos called the Flat Earth Clues, which delve into the possibility of the flat Earth and a Truman Show-like enclosed system, and that's what we're talking about today. Mark, welcome to the Stary Time.
Hey guys, thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. Did I say your last name correctly?
Sargent? Yeah.
Sargent. There's a lot of jokes.
Yeah, I've heard those jokes since I was probably in second grade.
Absolutely, I'm sure you have. Hey, let's just before we go any further, flat Earth. What is it?
It's crazy. It's ludicrous, ridiculous, insane, and it shouldn't be anything you guys are talking about, but yet here we are. It is literally that you are not living on a globe, that you are living in a Truman Show enclosed structure thousands of miles wide. You're living underneath a firmament if you're into biblical things. That everything you know about space, everything from the planets, the sun, the moon, the galaxies has all been built on really bad science, and most of it has been a deliberate fabrication. But if you want me to boil it down real quick for you, it is that the government's what if. I'll put it, because I've been trying to come up with different ways, because I know this upsets people. So in fact, let me start with that. Anyone who's listening to this now, there is a chance this is going to upset you, because it is a world changer, literally. Nobody likes to feel like they've been tricked. Nobody likes to feel like they've been lied to.
Yeah.
And so what we've been kind of proposing here is that, let's say, we all know, Copernicus came out 500 years ago and said, oh yeah, the Earth is round, and there's all sorts of wonderful math and science, and says, oh yeah, it's obviously, I'm sorry, not round, a sphere, a ball,
okay,
a globe. If that's the case, then eventually you're gonna have to prove it visually.
Yep.
And so, okay, unfortunately 500 years ago, you didn't have anything. So, the 1700s, you had balloons that could go up at least high enough to carry a person. And then, the early 1900s, you get the internal combustion engine and some planes. And then you don't even get rocket travel until 1957. So the question is this. If you got high enough to take a picture of the Earth in 1957, and you were wrong, would you tell people? And I use the simple answer to that question is Raiders of the Lost Ark scenario, which is, and everyone remembers that Raiders of the Lost Ark from 30 years ago, or say 1981, I should say, where everyone was fighting over the Ark, the Ark of the Covenant. The Germans, the Americans, the British, everybody was trying, they're killing each other over this thing. But what was more interesting to me was the very end of that movie. What happens in the last 60 seconds? The Americans get it. They put it in a box, they put it in the warehouse, and they never show anyone ever again. Why? Because it is an artifact that science can't explain. And if science can't explain it, they don't want it around. Plain and simple. They do not want proof of, science and religion. There has been a division, because that's really what we're talking about here. A huge division for a very, very long time. And what if somebody found the edge of the world, proof of the firmament, proof of something that all religious texts have gone into for a long time? Would science tell anybody? No, of course they wouldn't. Because once they did, it would be a massive paradigm shift, a shift in power in all aspects, economic, religious, academic. And so they decided to keep it a secret for, the better part of 60 years. There you go. That's my short version.
Okay, so that was kind of like the things that you were thinking about that made you start investigating this in the first place.
Yes.
Okay, and then what made you think like that they would be doing that? Okay, like you said, it's for power and stuff.
Yeah.
But how are they able to control everything within this? Like, let's say that we are like it's within a dome, just for example. Dome. How are they able to make it seem like the physics of everything works out to where they're able to predict things? And then is that just, you think, a way for them to have powers, the ability to like say that they have it all figured out with science and such?
Yeah, they didn't have to control everything that was in here. All they have you want to talk about the luckiest people ever. And that is the powers that be. I want to call them I usually group into something called the authority, and that is the super rich, the governments, and the royals. You know, people that control the politicians, basically. And when you stumbled across this, I mean, the system was already built for us. You know, by, you want to call it the divine, you want to say the God subcontracted out the work, and it was built by an advanced civilization. Take your pick. It's going to be one of those two. But all they had to do was keep the lie going. And that was just money. That's all that took. So you see, and some creative policies. So, for example, when they seal off, and I know I'm going to be jumping around a lot because it's tough to do in an hour or even an hour and a half, but when you see the two big things that just screamed at me, because I was looking at this, and remember, everybody that starts out in the flat Earth world, they try to debunk it. Nobody jumps on the flat Earth bandwagon right away. Everybody says this is just the stupidest thing ever. I tried to shut it down for months, could not do it until finally I said, you know what? Maybe I'm going about this the wrong way. If I actually found out about this place, and I was trying to hide the world from the civilization I lived in, how would I do it? Exactly. And the first two things I would do would be I would make sure the boundaries were completely secured, that nobody could get to them. And coincidentally enough, the Antarctic Treaty, which was put in place in 1959, which says no corporation can ever go down to Antarctica and do work, ever. That was a big one. And the Van Allen radiation belts were announced in 1959, which says, oh yeah, by the way, if you go up real high, there'll be radiation and it'll kill you. And that discourages the private space program, which deterred all the major players like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and General Dynamics for years and years. But the Antarctic Treaty was so glaring. For example, let's say you're the president of ExxonMobil, and you have unlimited financial resources at your disposal. And Admiral Byrd, goes down in 1954, says on television that there's oil down there and there's coal and minerals. You're telling me you can't go down there? In fact, not only can you not go down there, you're not even allowed to talk about it. You're head of ExxonMobil. You could give the New York Times, the Washington Post, throw them a briefcase of money every week and say, run a story and tell America how great it would be for us to go down there. They're not even allowed to lobby. And not to mention, it's the only piece of real estate anywhere that nobody owns. That and sealing, again, NASA being created in 1958, it just screams structure, and that is you're sealing off. It's exactly what I would do, which is you seal off the outer edge and the upper edge at the same time. It was brilliant in that aspect, but they were limited in their special effects technology. What could you fake, and how long could you fake it? And I will give them credit that because people are going to say, well, don't you believe went to the moon? I'm going, no, I'm way worse than what you think there. I'm saying that the entire reason NASA was created was to keep this thing a secret. That you went, because it just bugged me for the longest time, for like 10 years. Why would you fake, the Americans anyway? Why would you fake going to the moon?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, well, this changed that. It changed it from a question to a statement. And that was, it's not that they wanted to fake the moon missions. You had to. If you don't fake it, eventually the private sector is going to get involved. So you've got to get up there. You've got to at least fake a picture. We'll throw in, I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, but feel free to jump in anytime, which is the picture thing was a huge giveaway for me, which was everyone remembers the picture taken in 1972 from Apollo 17, coming back and shows the bottom part of Africa and all of Antarctica. Why was that the only picture taken? From 1972 all the way until July of last year, 2015. And why did you wait from Apollo, 8, 9, 10, 9 didn't go, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all these supposedly round trips to the Van Allen belt, which, by the way, you never did explain how you got through the radiation without shielding. Even though we all know the only ways you can shield from radiation, there's only two metals that do any damn good, and that's lead and gold. Nobody says what they used or if they used anything. So anyway, that's where, everywhere I turned, everywhere I looked to try to debunk this thing, I thought I would find a mountain of evidence in the globe's favor and say, to shut this thing down. I did not want it to be flat. I never wanted it to be flat. But the more I looked, the more it ended up, I just started banging my head on the keyboard to the point I was like going, I can't actually prove it's a globe. And that's... Yeah,
can I ask you a question that maybe I think a lot of listeners might have too?
Go ahead.
This is Steve talking, by the way. First of all, I just want to say I'm really admire the fact that you take such a strong stance on something that a lot of people push against. So that's just good to start with.
Thanks.
But I do wonder this. I've been in a plane before, as I'm sure maybe a lot of our listeners have.
I was on a plane this morning.
And I feel like I do see, even with my own eyes, a little bit of a natural curve to the Earth when I get high enough, especially when you live in an ocean area. I think that you can kind of see a little bit of a curve.
Yep.
And I've also been on pretty long flights. We'll just say I've flown to Egypt before, about a 15-hour flight.
Yep.
And so are you saying that maybe the Earth, or not the Earth, but the region that we're entrapped in is big enough to even fool pilots to think that they're going within a certain amount of area, or do pilots know that they're encircling themselves to kill time? And
no. Pilots don't know anything. And to your question, there's two ways to answer this.
Okay.
Which is the first is when it comes to the when you say you go up there. Mm-hmm. And you see a curve. I put out this because the flat Earth clues, which I did, which were about a year ago. I put something to the internet and I said, okay, because I get that a lot.
Yeah.
People say, oh yeah, I was up in an airplane, I saw the curve. I go, did you, or did you just want to see the curve? Because all you have to do now, because everybody's got cameras, take a picture of it when you get a chance. Put it on whatever laptop or the biggest display you can find. Mm-hmm. Hold a straight edge up to it, and tell me the curve's still there.
But the pictures are different than what you see.
Well, are they? I mean, if eventually you're going to run into somebody. I'm saying that nobody has come forward. But let me answer the second part.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay, because I've had a whole bunch of people, subject matter experts, which have come on my my little show, and I haven't had to solicit a single one of them. They've all come forward, and I've had two guys especially, which I was interested in. One was a flight instructor out of Iowa. Owns his own flight instruction company, and he was very open about it, and wasn't anonymous at all. And another guy was a retired United States Air Force navigator who specialized in refueling over long distances with other planes. And they both told me the same thing. This answer goes to why wouldn't pilots run into it? Mm-hmm. And they both said because pilots are just way too busy. They'd never notice it. And they kind of went off one of my clues, which was even if a pilot, after all his checklists and went through all these different things, even if a pilot suspected something was wrong, do you really think that anything on their list of the top 50 reasons why they think something is wrong, that any of them is going to be like, well, the map's obviously wrong because the Earth has got to be flat. They're never gonna make that leap of faith. And even again, there's even another barrier. That is, even if they did make that leap of faith, who are they going to tell? They're gonna go to the company they work for. They're gonna go to the FAA, which is why I joked in one of the clues. I said you would be better off as a pilot saying that you were chased by a UFO for 2 hours. Because you are going to be grounded immediately. You're going to be put on a desk job, and then they're going to forget about you as quickly as they can. So no, pilots are definitely not in on it. In fact, there's almost nobody is in on this, which is why it has been hidden so extremally well. Is because nobody. Why would you ever see it? Let me throw one more at you, because I ran to a scientist about 6 weeks ago, and I asked him on air. We were in this debate, and this wasn't the heated part of the debate. This was a different guy. And I said, okay, let's say you're a scientist, and you want to grab the average person on the street, and you want to convince them that they're on a curve. How would you do it? And I thought he would knee-jerk react on this one and say, well, I'd show him boats in the horizon, or I'd take him up in a plane. And he goes, you know what? I couldn't do it from the ground. He goes, in fact, I couldn't even do it from a plane. The only thing I could do is give the guy $20 million, and hopefully I can get him on some private space program and get him up high enough. And that's the reason why nobody's gotten this, because it's so well hidden that we assume so many things that we've just nobody's ever caught it. Why would anyone think about it? The conditioning, where again it seems so simple, but it's so thorough. Which is because the question I put to people, I say, how do you know it's a globe? How do you? No, each of you three guys there, how do you know it's a globe? It's not like water is wet, fire burns, you drop your pen and it falls to the ground. That may or may not be gravity. How do you know it's a globe? Is it because you saw a globe model since you were 6 years old and you went through high school and maybe college and maybe your PhD, and the globe was always there in the back of your classroom? Or is it because you saw a picture in a textbook? Because nobody owns their own spaceship. And it's like, well, NASA told us. But let me throw one more out, and that is, it's a decent argument, but George Orwell, who wrote 1984, he said he actually wrote about this in 1946, and he wrote an article just about how people believe things, and he goes, it's really strange. He goes, you could ask anybody on the street how they know the Earth is a globe, and they'll say, well, everybody knows it's a globe. And then if you press it, they get angry. But that shouldn't have been possible back in 1946. We didn't even have jet planes in 1946. So how did everybody know it was a globe? It was because they were told, and they believed it. So anyway, sorry, that's my...
No problem. I'm going to follow the same vein of kind of the last question, but first I'm going to do one. We actually, all three of us grew up we live in Cape Canaveral. So we've seen a lot of rocket launches and heard the sound barrier break and everything.
Sure.
So if these things go up, is the ceiling that we're seeing? I want to kind of just get your kind of description of what it is that we're inside of. Is it like you're just going to use the Truman Show, since that's kind of like a very standard basis or a model for kind of an alternative view? Would it be that there's just kind of like a screen up there? And so how far up is it before there's something, and then how is it projected back to us is the first question.
If you want to try to define it, put a visual to it. Imagine kind of like a shallow sports stadium. So it's not like, from what I can tell anyway, it's not like a snow globe where it's this high arcing, spherical barrier up above. It seems very, very shallow. And by that I mean the width of this thing's got to be 20,000+ miles wide, but the height may only be 4,000 miles high, which is pretty thin by comparison. Again, like a shallow sports stadium. Now, what it's made out of? Boy, just take your pick on that one. I mean, it could be anything. What we can tell is it seems impenetrable, but it is, it could be a heavy element. It could be a heavy water. It could be a frequency. It could be electromagnetic. What it seems to, what it warrants, though, is that mankind, at least our civilization, ever since they figured it out in 1956, have been trying to punch a hole through it. Starting with atomic weapons in 1958, which ran for 4 years. The Soviet Union and the Americans, remember, this was when nuclear weapons were not cheap. Mm-hmm. And they were throwing some big stuff up there, and they did this for 4 years, finally quit on the same day.
Yeah.
Then what do it seems like okay, fine, brute force doesn't do it, so what else you got? Well, we got HARP, something with frequencies. Yeah, maybe that'll do it. No, that's not doing it. What else you got? Well, you got this CERN thing. CERN seems like a pretty clever, maybe we could bypass the dome entirely, open up a gateway through it without actually going through it. That seems to be sort of the dimensions of the materials are still unknown, but it seems to be a display of some sort, that the stars and the planets are no different than you would be inside a planetarium. The people will come at me and say, well, I go take binoculars and I can see Jupiter, and it seems pretty real to me. I'm going, well, yeah, but if you took the same binoculars into a planetarium and you looked at Jupiter in there, is Jupiter more or less real with the binoculars?
Right. And so then, but if I'm in a planetarium and there is a wall, then there's something like I leave the place and I'm in somewhere else. So like, what is on the other side of the dome?
Good. Getting to the meat of it. If I had to take a stab, I would say it was the opposite of this place. Meaning, I mean, there's a couple schools of thought here. Some people said, that the dome, if you're going to go down the biblical path, that the dome was here to protect us. The firmament was here to protect us. Oh, by the way, I've got to throw this out, which is, if anyone hasn't looked or hasn't heard me say it on other things, you want to look at something really curious, and that is look at Wernher von Braun's headstone, where it's, was it 1912 to 1977, and it's a very modest headstone. You'd think it'd be some giant statue of him pointing at the sky, but no. But underneath his birth year and his death year is just written Psalms 19:1. It's like, wow, I had to look it up. And what do you think Psalm 19:1 says? It says, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Why would the father of NASA, the father of rocket science, when you hear the rocket scientist joke, that's the guy they're talking about. Why would he be talking about the firmament from the grave? But to answer your question, what is inside or what is outside? Is the firmament around us to keep us safe from the outside? Or is it to keep us, like we're a box of kittens? Or are we like a box of scorpions that really shouldn't be allowed? I mean, how many science fiction movies do we have to see that in? Where it's like, yeah, human beings, you guys aren't going anywhere because you're just going to wreck everything from what we can tell. But I think it's an unlimited dimension. I think this world, not to steal too much from Agent Smith and the Matrix, that is based on levels of misery and suffering, I think the outside is the exact opposite of that. I think it is an unlimited dimension. If anyone has any doubt, look up the 5 Masonic tracing boards. I think some of the old Mason stuff new. And so that's my thought.
So you get to the Truman Show and you're watching. I love the Truman Show. So
no, the Truman Show is brilliant.
So you're watching the Truman Show and you finally get to see that there's a guy in a control room just outside that's controlling everything, controlling the people inside of it, controlling everything.
Yep.
Night, day, rain, shine. He's the one controlling it.
Yep.
Is it like that? Is there God who's just right, like he's just on the other side with a microphone controlling everything? Is he what do you think? Like, what do you think?
Well, again, there's only 2 answers to that, which is it's either God or an advanced civilization that works for God. Because it is intelligent design, no question. You can't be an atheist and believe in this thing at the same time.
Yeah.
Because if we're in a building, well, then somebody built it, which means a creator. But is God, the end all be all God, of creation? Is God? God's a busy guy, I would imagine, or woman, or whatever it is. I think there's somebody up there watching, and that kind of leads me into not to go down the road too far, but why this is coming now, why people are talking about this now, why I've done 70 interviews in the last year, why there's so many people that are going, and it's resonating with so many people, including women, and women are a tough sell, and why is that? I think it's because there's a revealment process in the works here, which is whoever built this. So again, you can take 2 paths here too, which is whoever built this is either going to show up or someone's going to show up and say that they built it. And you guys probably know where I was going there. So because we're going to buy it. Whoever shows up, I don't want to make fun of the religions, the big 5 being Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. You can believe whatever you want, but let's face it, the first God that shows up wins. Because whoever shows up, if they, make a bunch of miracles happen and do some, bunch of wonders, people are going to bite on that hook, line, and sinker. And, except for people that say, no, it's not. It's, it's the anti-version of that. So we'll have to see. But that's what it kind of feels like now, that there seems to be a revealing process, that the 100th monkey effect could be in play here. That if enough people know, and which is why I've been supporting this since the beginning, which is because it's like with any experiment, including stuff that we build. If enough people, if once enough people realize it's an experiment or realize where they are, well, then a trigger is tripped, and whoever is involved has to intervene. because with the whole point of trying to simulate a globe was to hide the fence, was to keep people acting naturally. Once they stop acting naturally, well, there's no point, in continuing with the ruse. You're going to have to fess up. So that's where it seems like we're heading towards.
I got a question for you, Mark.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if you ask the average person, like the reason why they believe the world is round is just because, I've seen a picture of it or something along those lines.
Yeah.
The same reason you told me not to believe that, when I went up on an airplane was because take a look at a picture and it's flat on my screen. So I feel like it's the same logic being applied to me. So
good.
what should force me to look at it from a different view as opposed to just like I feel like it's easier to disprove something by just saying a negative as opposed to giving positives.
Got it. So the thing that we've been working on recently, we've been discovering stuff. It seems like every month. Yeah, and you're right. And I don't want you to. It's not that I want you to go up in a plane and take a picture and see that it's flat, because I actually believe, because the computer models that I've seen, you'd have to get up way, way higher to actually see any curvature at all. In fact, the weather balloons at 120, 130,000 feet, I've been shying away now and saying, look, it doesn't prove, because I've seen both, the dog cam version from London and the Felix Baumgartner footage, the Red Bull jump, which wasn't that long ago. But one shows very, very flat plane at 120,000 feet, and then Felix was at 130,000 feet and shows a severe curve, like Arizona takes up apparently the whole world.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, the jump doesn't prove that the Earth, neither prove the Earth is flat. But what it does show is that mainstream media is pushing a severe curve model, even if it's at the subliminal level. Meaning Felix is jumping and people look and they say, they of course in the back of their heads going, that curve looks a little severe, but they're not going to go any further than that. They're just going, we're on a curve. But if I had to direct people to look and see what they think, how they would go about trying to look at this, I would look at not necessarily negative things, but the absence of things, which was the absence of, because that's where I tried to look. I said, look, if you're going to want to shut this down, you're going to have to find all the stuff that shows it's a globe. And so when I saw the first, the only photo, the Apollo 17 photo, and a huge absence of other photos. When I was looking for video of the Earth spinning on its axis, the only video that's ever been out there was the Galileo 1990 footage, which show the Earth's rotating 24 hours from a pretty big distance. But one of the early flat Earth guys dissected that one. He goes, that's really great, but in 24 hours the clouds don't move. The weather didn't morph for whatever reason, and now even NASA is disavowing. In fact, we had one of our guys pretend to be a Hollywood producer, calls up the trademark office of NASA, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to try to do a movie, blah blah blah." The guy totally bought it, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm going to need some stock footage of the Earth rotating on its axis from space." And the guy goes, and the NASA says, "No, we don't have it. We don't have any of that." It's like, what are you talking about? The thing that I mentioned in my clue, where no astronaut on any mission, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Space Shuttle, Soyuz, take your pick, no astronaut has ever taken a camera and an exterior, and did at least a 180-degree pan with the camera running, let alone a 360. There's no footage of any vehicle leaving orbit or entering Earth's orbit, which you would have thought would have happened with something. And then some guy just found 3 weeks ago. He goes, you realize we don't even have footage of any astronaut inside an airlock when they open the door. We've assumed all these things.
But why assume flat? Why not triangular, for example, or an octagon? Why flat?
Because of the lack of curvature. And I wasn't even a huge fan of this. I was a big fan of the Orlando Ferguson map of the 1800s, where he said it was sort of shaped like a roulette wheel, although I can't say roulette wheel anymore because all the roulette numbers add up to 666. I had no idea, so now I have to call it a hubcap. Because a lot of people got mad at me. They said, no, it's really, really flat, with the exception of mountains and stuff. There's really no curvature to be measured. I was going, okay. And then as months passed, we found out, because we can test it all day long now, that for side to side, you're not going to you're not going to see much. But front to back, you should be able to see quite a bit. And that is, if you're looking over the edge of a ball, you're really looking over a hill. And that hill supposedly slopes down, if you believe mainstream science, at 8 inches per mile squared, which is 8 inches times every mile times itself. So if it's 2 miles, it's 2 times 2 is 4, which is times 8, which is 32 inches. 3 times 3 is 9, times 8 is 72 inches. And it just gets steeper and steeper. It's not just 8 inches per mile, because that would just be a slope, like a board going down stairs. So we started looking at long distances with this, and once we started looking at things like, again, the Chicago skyline or the Toronto skyline or the Hawaiian Islands, we're seeing distances way farther than we should be able to. The Chicago skyline time-lapse footage, which was brilliant, and that's only a couple months old, where it's from beach level, and you're looking across at about 52, 54 miles, which should be 1,600, 1,700 feet below the curvature, which means on the other side of the hill. But there are the buildings. It's time-lapse. There's the weather going by, the sun going down, night's coming up. The buildings, there's not a superior mirage. Mirages don't last through weather and temperature changes in perfect clarity. We were lucky to get that. And then all the subject matter experts that kept coming forward. I've interviewed like 13 so far from all branches of the military and the professional sectors, and they all say the same thing. It's like, yeah, we've all heard of the curvature, but we don't actually factor it into anything we do. The Navy guy, the very first guy that came to me, he goes, look, I'm shooting a 2-inch beam radar at 60 miles. He goes, that's a couple thousand feet below the curvature. He goes, that's ship to ship. He goes, unless that ship happens to be 2,000 feet high, we shouldn't be able to paint a target. He goes, we're not bouncing off the atmosphere to hit this thing. He goes, it's beam radar. He goes, it's not possible. He goes, on top of that, he goes, we're not using the Coriolis effect. We're not factoring in the Earth's spin into any firing solution. And all the military guys said the same thing. The tank gunner, the artillery guy, the submarine guy that's shooting missiles and torpedoes, and the missile guy, and the United States Marine Corps sniper. He goes, the sniper guy, even the mainstream media will say, oh yeah, we factor in the spin of the Earth into our shots. Sniper guy's goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I taught sniper school for 3 years. It's not even in the manual. He goes, there's no. So I'm sorry. To answer your question. Why is it flat? It's flat because nobody can find the curve. So now, is it flat and round like a dinner plate? Well, it seems like it is. If Antarctica is not what it is now, it could be flat and shaped like something else, like a big square, which is kind of what some of the biblical people have been saying anyway. That the water part of it is like a puddle, but it has to have boundaries, and the boundaries are shaped like a square. But yeah, so what we're looking at is some sort of flat, standard shape.
Okay. So the kind of thing. This is Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Thing that works kind of backwards for me for this is that for the majority of humans' life, it was thought, like as far as the time of the age of the Earth, it was thought that the Earth is flat.
Yep.
But then the reason that it was determined that it wasn't flat is because as people started traveling and going one direction, they found that if they went the other direction, they could get there quicker, and they started making their maps. Rather than their square, first they had to roll it and make a cylinder. They're like, well, this is true. And then they went the other way, north and south, and then they folded it over again. Like, okay, well, this is how it works. Not based on pictures that they saw or going high enough, just because that was the best way for them to do trading routes and stuff. And then also based on the fact that they were doing mathematics on how the stars were going around and coming around at an exactly predictable rate, which I know that part would be explained by a screen. But
sure.
But as far as gravity works, like there's no other possible way to explain the acceleration or deceleration of gravity when you go in a certain direction, like not going just like up and down, but going at angles, unless you take into account the curvature. Like physics just would break if you didn't do that.
Well, again, unless the physics were, because I don't think for a second that building the sphere was just a man-made incident. I believe that it was part of the creation process. I believe it was part of the natural process, and that was eventually, because think of what's happened in the last we only really got interesting in the last 500 years. If you introduce, from a creation standpoint, let's say the man in the moon from the Truman Show, if you introduce the sphere idea, and, you know, kind of help them out with the physics to back it up. Because remember, physics can be written to do just about anything. If you introduce that, then what does that buy you? It buys you time more than anything, and that is the human race buys you, in this case, 500 years. I think we were supposed to figure this out eventually, that we were supposed to figure out the riddle, like the physics from back then were just this big bundle of knots that we were going to be able to untie. And that we looked like we were getting really, really close. Unfortunately, the United States and the Soviet Union governments figured it out first, and they decided to keep a lid on it. As far as your physics that you mentioned, let's throw in the because I love this. I was one of the guys on YouTube. It was Vsauce, one of the nationally academic guys.
Classic Vsauce.
The classic Vsauce.
I watch his videos.
Okay, so Vsauce actually did a video on this a couple of years ago. It's got like 8 million hits. And it was interesting because he was talking about like the sticks and shadows argument, which is, if you use sticks and shadows in different places, you can kind of track the sun, and you can prove that it's X number of miles away, and everything works out great. But then he says in the video, and you ought to listen to it to get a chance, because we chopped it up, where he goes, now, it also works if the sun happens to be, 3,000 miles away, and if it's only 30 to 40 miles across. But then it's like, well, that's just ridiculous, though. And it's like, wait, you mean more ridiculous than have it be hundreds of thousands of miles across and 92 million miles away? So it can work both ways, but there was no way. Again, there was no way. You can do all the math you want, but until you get up and see it for yourself, until you can get up there and figure it out, what do you really know? Let me throw out one more at you, which is the crust of the Earth. I'm going to beat science to death with this one until they submit, which is okay. The science. I say science has these great cross sections of the Earth, and we all know them. We see them: red band, orange band, yellow band, white milky center. And I'm going, oh, that's great. So you've sent a probe down. It's 4,000 miles to the center of the Earth, if you believe that. And it's like, well, you sent a probe down that far. Well, no. So how far did you send it? 2,000 miles? 1,000 miles? 100? 10? Deepest hole ever drilled is 8 miles. So and they come back and I go, so what's this picture you're showing of us with this, all the cores and the bands of the Earth? And by the way, you've also done this on every other planet as well, and even planets that are outside of this solar system. And they said, oh, we took seismic waves. We basically knocked on it real hard, and we kind of figured out what was going down there. I was going, well, that's kind of like knocking on the first coconut. You can knock on it all you want, but what do you really know until you get in there? And then but the reason why they did it, my argument to them is, you don't know, but yet you push in the classroom. And I know they put disclaimers on there, but they're really quiet disclaimers. It's like, well, we extrapolate. We kind of speculate on what's going on based on volcanic this and volcanic that. But why don't you put a globe model in the textbooks with a cross-section of it that has a big question mark in the inside? And that's because science won't do that. They are going to put in whatever, because they don't like people asking questions. They hate the repeated questions, and that's the same thing that applies here. If you're just gonna make up stuff about the depth of the Earth and what's underneath us, why wouldn't you make up stuff about just about anything?
Yeah. One thing you said a couple minutes ago was that physics basically can be made to say whatever you want it to say.
Yes.
And so it seems like almost you're saying that there is nothing that is real that we've been taught. Is math real? Is 1 + 1 actually 2? Where do we get from what we've been taught? How do you decide what you've been taught that is true and what you've been taught that is not true?
Good point.
Is it all a lie? Where did it I'm having a hard time figuring out where how it's possible for us to be all of us to be so lied to and so fooled with nobody that we know who's actually in on it.
And you're right. It's a tricky proposition because look, I'm a huge science fan. I'm a big nerd, right? I was in the tech sector for years. I owned a comic book shop. I was a chemist. I had an illegal fireworks company briefly.
Good for you.
Thank you. I was a pretty big nerd, and then science has been good to me over the years. But what I've noticed about them is they tend to go too far. Now, I'm not saying they lie about absolutely everything. George Carlin will say that don't trust anything the government tells you. Science has made some wonderful things over the years, no question. But what they don't seem to have is the moral, ethical, whatever you want to call it, the ethical compass to know when to stop. And they're also very, very protective of their own interests. Again, going back to the Indiana Jones thing. Now, if an artifact is found, and I don't care what it is, you want to call it a magic wand, a cape, a ring of power, you're never going to see it. Because they don't want, if science can't repeat it, I call science really magic without the mystery. If they can't repeat it or explain it well enough to where the public buys it, they're not going to show it to you. When it comes to, they created light bulbs. Works great. What? I couldn't do without them. The internal combustion engine, there's some side effects there. Air conditioning, but they tend to go too far. And they don't. You probably remember the old atomic weapons test when Oppenheimer, some of the physicists were joking, where one of the guys' math was wrong, but he put it out there and he goes, if we do this, there's a chance we could ignite the atmosphere and just burn everyone alive. And they said, well, who's going to yell at us? And they pulled the switch anyway. So they have turned themselves into, I'm not going to say religion, because that's not necessarily what they are, but they take liberties like religions do in some cases. Do they lie about everything? No, of course they don't lie about everything. But would they lie to protect their own interests? Yes, they would.
Sure.
And I just don't. I think in this case, it was flew into. And I was the first one to say this, which was, look, if I was in the 1950s, and this would have been a short board meeting, which is you're back then, and it's like, you know what? We just found the edge of the world, and it turns out it's also simultaneously the handprint of God, which gives every religion in the world their mystical artifact that they've been looking for thousands of years, and could send science back into the Dark Ages. Should we tell the population? And everyone in the boardroom's going, you out of your mind. We can't tell anybody this. Not until we figure out how we're going to release it ourselves. So that's what I think they've been working up to. I don't think it's an all-out hidden lie where it was going to be hidden forever. I think they knew full well, like hiding something from your roommates in your apartment. You're never going to be able to hide it forever. You can shift it around here and there, but sooner or later the population is going to find out. And that's where I think we are now. The detection capability between social media, high-speed internet, way better cameras, way better HD cameras, has changed all that. I mean, YouTube is the new television. And there's a lot of unemployed people out there, so it's getting around really quick, and it's again, I didn't think it would resonate. I thought I was missing something when I put these things out there. I really thought a scientist would come in and say, "Look, you're wrong because of this, this, and this." And even Neil deGrasse Tyson, when he went on television, you guys probably caught that. He didn't bring his A game, and he could have. He could have, I wouldn't have done what he did. I would have done different things, and he didn't. Almost like they're even faking the resistance to this. They're setting this up for something else. He could have come out and instead of doing a 7-minute speech where the audience was lost in the first 90 seconds, he could have shown a couple no graphics, no pictures, no movies. Are you kidding me? Drop the mic. That's it. That's all you're going to do. It was showmanship. That's all it was. So
Sure.
Anyway, sorry.
So going back to the Truman Show, we get to the climax of the Truman Show when Truman figures it out.
Yeah.
And he gets on his boat. He conquers his fear. He sails, and he hits the wall.
Yeah.
And he's like, "This is it." And he has to decide, am I going to go on the other side of the wall or not? Yeah. What is stopping you, as somebody who believes that the Earth is flat and that we're in an enclosed, from getting on a boat, going to the end, and finding the enclosed dome?
For one, it's sealed off tighter than a drum. You can't. Can you go down to Antarctica? Yes, said this in one of the first clues, which is if you want to go down to Antarctica and have pictures taken with penguins, you can spend 10, 15 grand and go down there. It's going to be cold and miserable. But I don't think for a second, let me use, and I don't know how well versed you guys are in certain books, but the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jasher. The interesting thing about the Book of Jasher, the end of the very last verse of chapter 3, which was which was Enoch leaving, basically, where they couldn't follow him because he kept walking through all this ice and snow and more ice and more snow. it took Admiral Byrd, Richard Byrd, it took him almost 30 years to find the edge. And that was he was flying his own set of planes, and he had the help of the Soviet Union. And he was down there for 30 years, just flying and refueling stations and flying. Whatever, it's probably the edge of this thing from a land standpoint is probably way further than most people have really given thought to.
Right, but what about east and west? Like the Antarctica is obviously frozen. That's cold. You don't want to go down there, but you could go in either direction and you would find the same things. It's just a dome, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, in this model, every direction, no matter where you go, eventually you're going to hit the edge of the dinner plate, which is Antarctica. It's the only continent in this map that is not as advertised. Meaning, we all see Antarctica as 13 million square miles, a continent, a little bit bigger than Australia. Right. But in the flat Earth model, that continent doesn't exist like you think it does.
To that point, can you explain your map just a little bit more, like we were talking about earlier with the plane? Like
yeah.
So
sorry about that.
How do we get to Asia to California, which is easier than going the other way? Like, what does your map look like? Is it the same as we think of it, as we think of a globe, or what does it look like?
No. I'm sorry. I probably should have prefaced with that. If you want to look at it, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. If you're looking up online, the wiki projection is called the azimuthal equidistant. That AZIMUTHAL equidistant, EQI distant.
And you guys think that science is too confusing. Simplify the term there.
Yeah, that's their term. It's their projection, and of course it's weird because it's that projection. And I kind of stumbled across this because I was looking for the flat Earth map, and I ran into this in the list of wiki map projections. And this isn't even officially the AE map, what I like to call it, is not even the flat Earth map. It's not associated with the flat Earth, but it is associated with other things. One, it's part of the United States Geological Survey, the USGS. It's part of their catalog. It was created by a Persian scientist 1,000 years ago. His name was Al-Biruni, who happens to have a moon crater named after him. NASA named a moon crater after him. I have no idea why. And it's also the UN flag. If people really wanted the simple version of it, just look up the UN flag. There it is. That's the AE map. Now, for whatever reason, they're not cross-referenced to the Flat Earth map from the Flat Earth Society. The UN flag is very, very curious also because it is identical to the Flat Earth map. But there's one thing missing on this map, and that's Antarctica. Why Antarctica is not on this map, I have no idea. There are other projections you could do to simulate what you want to do and include Antarctica, but Antarctica as a continent is nowhere to be seen, nor is it even mentioned when you're looking up the United Nations flag. They don't address it. Instead of Antarctica, what they do have on the outside, though, is a set of Greco-Roman wreaths, big ones, going around the outside, these jagged, spiky things. And they never seem to address it, but that's what it looks like. So you basically take the globe and you take your hand on the North Pole and you flatten it, and then you kind of cut around it, everything kind of expands out to be like a circle. So you would be if you took the globe and tried to fit it onto a dinner plate, that's what it would look like.
Could it be just because the UN wants every country to be represented, or is it because if you made a circular, like a globe, like normal, it wouldn't show every country on the map, so it would be unfair to certain countries to not have their countries shown.
But you could do something like, and I will, if you guys are here, and hopefully you can look in chat, give me 1 second.
Oh, here we go.
I will find, that somebody actually sent this to me. Because they said you can't do it without doing it like that, and I said, really, you can't do it without doing that? Because there was.
Are you gonna put a split globe? Maybe is that?
No, you could do. That's what I thought initially. You could do was a split globe, right? And somebody said, no. He goes, they've already done it before. They did it in the 1960s. I go, really? I go, show me, and they showed me this.
Oh.
And what that is, you're never going to believe what that is. So that shows exactly what we thought it would. Basically, it's the Mercator map squished into a sphere. Pretty elegant, actually, and it's got the reeds around it, right? They obviously stole from the UN when they made this map. You know what that logo's from?
Hit me.
Star Trek, the original series, the mirror universe where there was an evil Kirk and an evil Spock, that was their insignia. Go figure. I was going, so there you have it. There you can fit the. In fact, it was done 50 years ago. You can fit the entire world, including Antarctica, onto a spherical map. And if you want to, you could squeeze it. Of course, you could take the sword out of that. But you could squeeze that onto a flag very, very easily. And they didn't do it. It was almost like they wanted to, even though Antarctica, again, a big place, and don't want to do any forward thinking? Fine, nobody owned it back then, but you think nobody's going to own it ever? It was kind of like they were just removing it from people's thought processes. Is like, well, out of sight, out of mind. Therefore, if Antarctica isn't on any UN flag, no one's ever going to bring it up. And they didn't. It never, no one's ever, if you look up at the wiki stuff, no one's ever talked about it, which is very, very interesting.
Okay, so here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend that lives in Greece, and there's been a conversation we've had where I was staring at the sun and he was staring at the moon.
Yes.
If the world is flat, how is he not able to see the sun? Because there's no possible way that the entire sun could be blocked by just nothingness. Like he would have there'd have to be some part, and then what makes the only sense is that part of the world is blocking it. Like that's the only thing that makes time zones even make sense.
The time zone question, and that is how can there be time zones if the sun, and that's because because of what you're thinking the sun is. You're thinking the sun is this giant omnidirectional light source. I notice I said omnidirectional. If the sun and the moon are roughly the same size, say 30, 40 miles wide roughly, and kind of spin over the earth like a mobile over a child's crib, very similar actually to the yin-yang symbol. Take the yin-yang symbol and put that on top of the AE map. It works really, really well. Don't know where that symbol came from, but that's a whole other thing for another time. But to your question, no, it's a directional light source. I've got a 3D model myself that was given to me. There's videos out on not just a computer model, an actually 3D model that was built for me. If you turn the sun or the moon into like a spotlight, then it works really well. So where it illuminates what it wants, and so the sun isn't actually setting in the horizon; it's just going away and tilting back to retain some form of its sphere shape. It's brilliant. And to your question, the moon is also a self-illuminated light source, and that has really spooked me out in the last 6 months because I didn't think it was initially. I thought, oh, okay, well, it's still reflecting the sun. But there can't be, how can you have crescents? How can you have the moon phases if there's no Earth between the sun and the moon? How can you have a blood moon, for example? And then somebody came up with the self-luminescent thing. He goes, you ever check the temperature of the moonlight? And I go, no, why? He goes, because it's cold. I'm going, what are you talking about? And so there's been people going out and doing tests. And again, you can go out and spend $15 on a little point and click, infrared thermometer thing, and it's mind-blowing because everyone knows if it's 100 degrees in the sun, it's 90, 80 degrees in the shade, right? But if you go out in the moonlight, let's say it's 50 degrees in the moonlight. Well, it's like 60 degrees in the moon shade. And I'm not saying that wrong. I'm saying that it's warmer in the moon shade than the moonlight.
But that's definitely not true because I can notice when I come out of a shade, it's hot in the sun. But when I go in, I never notice when I'm in the mood. If I close my eyes, I wouldn't be able to tell.
You may not be, but the temperature things
But I can tell with the sun, so that would make no sense if it's the same temperature difference. That I can only notice it with one.
I don't know what to tell you there, man. I mean, I can show you a whole bunch of videos where people are doing it. We've seen up to 12, 13 degree swings, and it doesn't make sense because it absolutely goes against what we know in thermal dynamics.
But I just looked at a test where that was opposite results. So how is your test different? Like, why would that test be more for sure than a test that I just looked at?
Show me the link to the test. Were they using digital thermometers or analog thermometers? And what were they projecting on? Because we go through videos every day and we have yet to see somebody reverse this thing.
Wouldn't this go back to the idea then that what we believe is based on videos and pictures and everything like that? The same thing I could make the exact same argument against.
No. I mean, I've done it myself. My friends have done it myself.
But he's saying that he's experienced the same thing himself, where he's gone outside and closed his eyes in the shade too.
Yeah.
So now we're going back to personal feeling again. So
but
now does it all come down to personal feeling in the end?
Because the thing that I've seen that with those tests is that you're exposing yourself to the temperature and then you go under the shade. So if it's cold outside, then going into a place, obviously the temperature is going to be warmer because you're no longer out in the air. So has nothing to do with the light. That has to do with the weather.
Yeah, but we're doing it with objects that are very, very close to each other. I mean, within 3 or 4 feet, and there's no enclosure that we're talking about. we're talking about, in fact, I'll take it one step further. There's a creepy one. There was a friend of mine in England who did this test, and I was the one that suggested it. Because I thought, I was thinking weird ways, which was because the thought was, okay, if it's cold, if the shade is warmer and the moonlight is colder, then what happens if you take a magnifying glass to that moonlight? Mm-hmm. Does it get warmer at that point, or does it even get colder? Does it magnify the cold light? And he took copper strips that were right next to each other. One was in the shade, one was in the moonlight, and one was under a magnifying glass being held by like a jeweler's arm. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, the magnified moonlight was even colder on these copper strips. It didn't make any sense. But what I'm getting at is that does that prove a flat Earth? No, it doesn't. But what it does is it really puts a wrinkle in what we have been told about the moon all these years, which is that the moon reflects the sun's light. And
then on the same point, though, because this has something to do with the same sun, how come when a ship is like coming, like you would so like a ship, like once it gets close enough, you kind of like can see it because your vision. But how come it doesn't just appear? Instead, it emerges like it's coming up. Like you see part of it, and then you see more of it, and then you see all of it. How would that not? Because like you've explained how like going left and right.
Oh yeah. The ships going in the distance. Oh man, there are so many examples of this now. We have learned so much in the last year between refraction and the vanishing point than we ever have before. Which is you'd think depending on which videos you watch, it appears that the mass that it's going down hull first, but in effect, it's actually we've got videos where the boats are actually hovering above the water. We've got. What happens is it blurs from the bottom up. And more important than that, though, is when those ships go away out of your line of sight with binoculars, you take a better set of binoculars or a camera with a digital zoom lens, you can bring the ship back. That should not be possible. So when the ship goes away, let's say it goes out to like 10, 20 miles, right? Ship's gone. But then you take a zoom camera, voila, the ship is back, even though it's technically on the other side of the hill. And again, don't forget my friend from the Navy who said, oh yeah, we can smack them at 60 miles away. No problem. They have to paint the target.
Mark, who are these guys you keep talking about?
Which guys?
You're like,
the testimony show. I'm sorry. I should probably do a shameless plug. On my YouTube channel, I have a playlist. My YouTube channel is Mark K. Sargent, although you can look up testimony shows or Strange World or whatever you want. But Mark K. Sargent, Sargent, there's a playlist called Testimony Shows. And it's a 2-hour interview, or me reading a statement if they want to be anonymous, where they, all these guys come on and talk about everything that's involved with their careers. Everybody, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, quite a few. In fact, I've got an Army helicopter guy I'm dealing with tomorrow. Career surveyor, 32 years. That guy was really, really interesting. Corporate travel agent, industrial engineer specializing in valves and seals that says the ISS, the International Space Station, cannot exist how they say it does because his company supplies stuff to the military for submarines, and there's no way they can do what they do. You know what my most interesting one though I think was the career surveyor, because he was so matter of fact about it. Meaning he had been a career surveyor in Indiana for 32 years, big projects, not like shooting the land at your home or like doing car plants, airport runways, entire cities, right? He and his friends have been doing this for decades. And he goes, it's weird because when we start out as a junior surveyor, they all tell us the same thing. And they go, treat your project like the world is completely flat and everything will be fine. And he actually asked when he was younger, and he's like, whoa, don't you have to deal with the curve? And they all said the same thing. They said, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. And so he treated all his projects like that. And he goes, it's really strange though. He goes, because when you're dealing with these big projects, 10, 20 mile tracts of land, you're dealing with curvature. And I think it's a perfectly flat, let's call it like a big flat cracker. He goes, my cracker has to butt up against another guy's cracker in all directions, north, south, east, and west. He goes, sooner or later, these big tracts of land have to deal with the curvature, but all the tracks all the projects butt up against each other perfectly, like Legos. He goes, He goes, there's never a problem. He goes, not only is there never a problem, we never even discussed any a problem in those lines. You know, nobody ever came into a thing. It's like, oh, hey, my project met your project, and you know, you're 6 feet off from mine. Oh, you probably didn't take into account the curvature of the Earth. Because that conversation never happened. He goes, the only guys that seemed to deal with it ever were the geodetic surveyors. He goes, and I don't know what the heck they're doing, because all they do is believe the globe is round, and that's how they try to factor their math. But he goes, in real life, it doesn't happen.
Hey, Mark, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So, and it's on this exact same thing. Because earlier in the show, I asked you about pilots and what they think about it, and you said earlier that pilots are too busy to notice or anything like that. But you just said tomorrow you got an Army helicopter guy coming on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of retired pilots that may not care if their job's at jeopardy because they don't have a job anymore in the industry.
Sure.
So why are there not literally? I mean, there have been thousands of pilots easily. I'm sure in the nature of flight. So
tens of
why has
thousands,
there not been a really large amount of pilots that have been saying stuff, at least to each other, that have been like, you know what, maybe we should come out with this. And I mean, you're mentioning one guy with a helicopter, but and I'm sure. No. Like, why is there not literally a large mass?
They're starting. That's the weird part. They're starting to talk to each other, because they all say that one, they say that we never would have noticed it, but the second thing they say is, all the instruments they use, especially the gyros that spin up on the ground and they spin up on level ground, and then they don't deviate and they don't adjust for the curve, meaning when you're flying, you've got to adjust 8 inches per mile squared, which means either, for example, the nose would have to be either constantly your plane, you'd have to either be, because if it was constantly level and that the curve was dropping beneath you, you would be constantly gaining altitude. So you would either constantly be trying to force the nose down in the plane every once in a while, or you could come back and the debunkers will say, no, gravity's pulling down. I'm going, fine. Then if gravity's pulling down, you'd be constantly trying to nose it up. Don't tell me that it's perfectly balanced. And they all said the same thing. Every instrument they use treats the world like it's perfectly flat.
How many pilots are we talking about here that you've at least heard of? You're saying that they are coming out.
That I've talked to?
Not even you, but just that you've heard of. How many? Just so I can get an idea.
A dozen, maybe, so far, that have already talked about it. Which is, again, considering this topic, it wasn't even a topic a year ago.
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive, and they're willing to come out on and talk. Go on, not on camera, but on air.
Yeah,
and talk about it.
This question goes back to, I wanted to do a follow-up about light, just because this is the thing that kind of is the most confusing to me about this model.
Sure.
2 things. One, I've never seen a case where light was ever cool. Like not let alone like the moonlight's cold. I've never seen any experiment that proved that, like, just on a small scale, that you can make a light that's cooled. Cool. But the other thing is, if the sun is, like you said, not omnidirectional, how come that it never changes from being a circle? It's the same size no matter where it is. If it was pointing only in one direction, you'd expect it to change shape as it started going away from you. If it was still pointing at you with the exact same size, then you would expect it to continue to be pointing at you, not be like the single direction.
Got it. Omnidirectional. Okay. First part is, believe it or not, we can make this now. I had to learn this last year, which was as far as the light goes. As far as making cool light, look up when you get a chance something called a cool laser. I did not even know it existed. We can do this with laser technology. It is high-end stuff. It is not in the civilian market as far as I can tell. I don't think they're curing back pain with it or anything like that, but it is out there. So, and again, the technology moving forward, it sounds great. The fact that, again, why we are able to detect this stuff. As far as your sun going off in the distance, there's something going on with the display of that sun that I still can't explain. There's a technology being used that I don't know. I know that we can do it in software. I know that much because we've been doing it in simulations now, the circles I was in for years, for the last 12, 14 years. As far as doing what you can do with light, making it appear, even though the sun might be a 3-dimensional object or a 2-dimensional object, where there's still argument there, how it can display a sphere as it's going away from you, instead of the sphere turning into elongated or oblate or whatever you want to call it.
Hasn't the moon been around for thousands of years, though, at least in general? So how come we're just arriving this technology now, and how did they have that kind of technology so far in the past?
You mean
the moon?
The moon being cool. You guys should know this by now, and that is the technologies that we've had. I mean, look at the our civilization, our unbroken records go back, 5,000 years?
Yeah.
But we know there's ancient civilizations that have come and gone. I mean, the vitrified glass in India, the lost city it's sunken off of Japan. How old are the pyramids? We don't know. It seems like we go in cycles. Are we the first people to rent this apartment? Not by a long shot. Mm-hmm. Technology gets lost, and so. But as far as who built this place and the advanced technology, boy, it could be a long. I mean, there's texts that I don't know if I believe it necessarily, but it wouldn't surprise me that talk about there was a time when the moon wasn't there. And then the moon had to be brought in, and it was like, wow, that seems really hard if it's a solar system. But if it's an enclosed system, that's not hard at all. You just drop it in. It makes a more interesting evening. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the coolest thing about this is that you have like kind of taken all the points and you've thought about them. I think that's like the coolest thing. Yeah. And I think that for us, we were not expecting it. Like, it seems like something that you can just, like you said, you ask somebody and they just assume that it's easy to debunk. But there's just a lot of alternative views. But it's because of that, like, because there's so many alternative views. Yeah. How do you explain, like, you know what Occam's razor is?
Yes.
Why would it be that rather than everything that makes sense together the way that I like that makes sense with, like, the way that explains the light, explains gravity, explains all these things, why is it that instead every single one of those things has an exception? That seems to me like that's overcomplicating it, and then you're creating, like, you're not making the world simpler, you're making it far more complicated by making yourself into the experiment of another world that still has to deal with these same questions.
Well, is it more? I mean, every system that I have looked at, when I started looking at this thing, eventually I got to where you were going, which was, all right, how was this thing built? If I had to build a world, forget about hiding it, that's a whole other thing. But if I had to build this place, and again, coming from a simulation design standpoint, how would I do it? And the more I dug into it, it just seemed to be more intuitive to build it inside a circular flat system, like a terrarium. You want to combine a planetarium with a terrarium. You could, if it was big enough, you can do some wonderful, wonderful things, and you don't think of all the things you don't need anymore. You don't need I'm talking from a creation standpoint. You're talking, the sun can be 30 miles across instead of 100,000 miles or whatever it is, 300,000 or 800,000. I can't remember. The moon being much, much smaller. The underwater conveyor system to run the oceans in a circular pattern. I want to have some fun. Look at the weather patterns when you look at it from an AE perspective, from an azimuthal perspective, because you can do that now online with simulations. It's really, really cool. The jet streams to run the upper part. I mean, really kind of breaks down when you're looking at it. Kind of looks a lot like building an automobile in certain ways. The cooling system, the ventilation system, the heating system underneath. I even, cause some people gave me crap because I was saying, look, in something like this, even the magma systems would be artificial. And they're saying, well, why wouldn't they be organic? I'm going, what, are you kidding? If you made the volcanic systems organic, one super volcano, and that's it. That's the end of your terrarium. That's over. Now, as far as, I'm not trying to dodge your question because I try to live one world at a time. So anyone outside of this, if you're trying to look at, a world outside of a world, I try not to get too far down that because then it gets into the Russian stacking doll argument, which is there's no end to it. It's like, okay, who created? Because by the way, that's also one of the reasons why I think nobody's ever landed down here. It's like the spaceships, which I firmly believe in. I've seen them with night vision myself. Why they never landed in the middle of Ohio and gotten out and shaken hands with people and said, hey, how's it going? Sign autographs, take a few pictures, and leave. Because it would create way too much havoc.
Wait, are you saying UFOs?
Yeah, but in a completely different context. So UFOs that we think of now, we all think, Venus and Mars and Jupiter and all that other stuff. But if those planets aren't, if what you see up in the sky isn't what you think, then where are these things coming from? Are they in worlds outside of our own?
Well, I think that's the general consensus, is that they're from other galaxies.
Sure, but do they have to be? Could it be so simple as, they could be literally right next door to us? If this snow globe, if you would lack of a better word, was next to another snow globe, then it's really, really quick. Or take another step, because, some people have suggested this, and that is, what if they were trapped in here with us? What if they're just remnants of previous civilizations and there's rules? Everyone wants to look up some creepy stuff. Look up because people say, Roswell's the epitome of all UFO stuff. No, look up the 1561 Nuremberg event. That'll put your hair on end, because there were 3 factions there, 2 fighting over the city for an hour, and then a third faction shows up in a giant black angular ship, and the other 2 take off. Who the heck were the guys in the black ship? Which means that screams that there's a hierarchy, there's a power structure, and that there's rules, even for the people that aren't us. Maybe whoever has to develop on the surface has to develop naturally, and not to steal from Star Trek too much, but the prime directive is in play. That you can't mess with people. If you guys remember watching the last Star Trek movie, why they have to keep hidden from the primitives, because the second that spaceship took off in the sky, they threw away all their old religious scrolls, and the Star Trek Enterprise was their new religion. It was I think we're in the same boat.
Sure. Mark, this is the difficult thing, because the 3 of us, we're Christians, and so at the end of the day, we do believe that there's a God outside of space and time that is ultimately over our creation. And so in some respect, we're on the same page there. The problem is there's so, it's almost like we have 2 hands. We have the hand that is all that we know, and NASA and the government and everything that we've been taught, with their videos and their pictures and their facts and their science and their math. And then on the other hand, we have you and your friends that are trying to push back against that with your photos and your videos and your science and your math and your thoughts.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, we have to sit here and decide, well, who's right? Is it the mass population, or is it the small population? And that's the tricky part, that we're facing.
I completely agree. I was raised born again Christian, and I went to vacation Bible school and youth group and everything you can think of. And if you want, I can throw out a little chapter and verse for you. But the guy that really, really did a number was a guy named Rob Skiba, Skiba, and his website. And he was one of my first the guys that I hit hard with this thing. His website is called testingtheglobe.com, and he goes through literally, I think in the King James, was every chapter and verse he could think of, and I don't want to quote too many things, but the 2 that really, really stuck out to me, forget about the revelations, the 4 corners of the earth and the angels holding back the winds, but Joshua asking God to hold the sun and the sky for an extra day so he could slay more enemies. That was a great one for me, because it's like, well, in a solar system model, that's a lot of work. Plus, you got to stop the Earth spinning. That's not a small task. I know God is divine, but it's like, wouldn't it be a lot easier if the place was just enclosed? It's like, you don't want the sun in the sky for another day. We'll just hit pause.
I don't know if necessarily God's trying to take the easy way out here, though.
I'm not saying
not easier than the other.
I'm not saying that either, but I'm saying that I'm saying that God is perfect and has divine tools, but God is also very, very efficient. God's not going to waste anything. One more before I'll get back in a second. But one more was when I put that in the clues, was the Tower of Babel scenario, which was, and I didn't mention it by name in the clues. I was hoping everyone would get it. Which was, Tower of Babel never made any sense to me as a child, because where were they going with that thing? If the Earth is spinning around 1,000 miles an hour and spinning around the sun at 60,000 miles an hour, where is that tower going? It's not going anywhere, because it's not meeting up with anything. But if it's an enclosed system, they know exactly where they're going. They figured out the borders of heaven, and they tried to go up against it, which is why God said, it's like, you know what, they're going to make it. We can't allow that to happen. Let's go down there and mess this thing up.
Remember where child sacrifice is going, though, because sometimes, those weren't going anywhere. I don't think they were doing the right thing on there either. So sometimes people back in the day got things wrong too. So.
Yeah.
I know that necessarily.
I
kind of got it right.
I got you. When it comes to, I'm not saying that God would take the easy way out. I'm saying that God would use tools that he wouldn't waste anything. Meaning, for example, people say, "Well, isn't there space outside of this?" I was going, why would there have to be space? If we believe there's space, if you're faking space, then there wouldn't have to be space. There's probably something else. Look up the picture. The one of the most wonderful, beautiful or carvings I ever saw was the Flammarion, Flammiron, Flammarion, where the story goes that the Catholic Church knew, had advanced maps and sent monks out to the corners of the earth, and one of them actually found a gap in the barrier and looked beyond it and saw these wonderful things that were reminiscent of Ezekiel. And anyway, again, I do believe that it is divine, and I believe this concept has brought a lot of people back to spirituality, and one of the reasons why I've been promoting it so hard.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just hard because, there's, to me, as I've done not nearly as much research as you have in this regard, but as I've looked at the galaxies and the stars and the moon and the sun, all of the stars and the moon and the sun and all of creation declares the glory of God, and I truly believe that. As I look at the science that our scientists from just across the river have given to us about what is out there and what is beyond, nothing has made me fall more in love with God than looking at His creation.
Sure.
And I just have a difficult time believing that I'm going to limit God to a screen. I just have a hard time with that. To me, it's so much bigger, maybe so much vast. There's just so much vastness there.
No, I hear you. Don't think of it though which one should I use? God made the heavens and the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars, but it was science that gave the dimensions. Science was the one that says that they were this far away and they were this big. In fact, I won't be able to quote the chapter and verse without looking it up. But what was that one where it was said that who were you? Where were you, or who were you when I laid down the dimensions of the earth, and where were you? Nobody knows but me. Some of those lines. It's not that I'm not taking away the stars or the sun or the moon. I am saying that they're yours and yours alone. They were meant for us. That they were meant. Makes it much more intimate. I'm not saying the stars. I mean, there's several people, including Rob Skiba, that said the stars aren't actually just they aren't. When I say a display system, I'm being pretty open-ended about this. Meaning, when Rob Skiba says, you know what, they could be the heavenly luminaries, and they could be angels marching around in the sky. Why not, right? I mean, who am I to say that they aren't? But if they are, that makes the whole process way more intimate and way closer and way more, in my opinion, more elegant. Look at the line from Revelations where the stars fell from the sky like figs from a tree. How the heck does that happen when they're millions of light years away? It doesn't, but if they're very, very close, and maybe they aren't, maybe they aren't just stars falling from the heavens. Maybe they're the angels coming down, as part of the last days. I'm probably not doing it justice. I can't compare myself to other people that are way better at this than I am, but I firmly believe that it doesn't. I know. Look, for you, if you're open-minded enough to think of the galaxies being so far away and that it's this God's massive creation, great. It probably resonates with you more than others. But the people that I've talked to so far have found a real peace with this, because it's like, look, we're in a place that was built by God, and it's not moving, it's not spinning. And was all here built for us, which is why I dedicated Clue 8 when I was doing the Flat Earth Clues to that, because people were getting depressed. They were saying, look, I'm feeling claustrophobic a little bit. And then I put it out. I was going, look, it was built, the whole thing was built for us. And how wonderful is that? And that's when people start clicking in and going, yep, now we're seeing it. And the Christian community, the ones I've talked to so far, they've embraced it way more than, I mean, all religions have embraced it to a certain degree. Not Buddhism so much. That's a whole other thing. But Christians, they've really been on it.
I think that we're going to start to, just based on time, start to wrap this up. And I think that there's like just so many more factors of things that I still want to ask. But I think that what this is, the most important thing is it encourages people. I think that for both of our sakes, we would want whoever's listening to start looking this stuff up, because it's good to either find out why you're wrong or find out why you're right.
Don't take my word for it.
Right, but I would encourage, I think that you would encourage this too, and to not do it with a bias, because the worst thing you can do is to take a stance and then start confirming it. So I know that I personally will be looking at kind of some of the stuff I've assumed and just try and have the mindset of not what I expect and see what happens. Sure. But thank you so much for
thank you.
Our questions. But I think I almost did. I just want to have you, because I'm dying to ask you more questions about like asteroids and hitting the Earth and all the elements and stuff. But there's so many more questions I want to ask. But I know that it could go on forever. So thank you so much for your patience with us.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Well, where can we send people to find out more? Because I know that people are asking those questions that we haven't asked yet. So is there a place that people can go to kind of keep reaching out and keep questioning you and stuff?
My stuff, the easiest way to find my stuff is to just type in either any search engine or on YouTube, type in Flat Earth Clues. If you want to look up everybody else's work that's out there, and there is a lot of work out there, just type in Flat Earth into YouTube and you will find just a wall of information. It's just huge now. It's now, I think, we broke 6 million just a couple days ago. Nice. 6 million relevant videos, which is it's nuts how much it's gone out. The website is enclosedworld.com. You'll see all my stuff there. And there's some apps. I'm not going to name by name, but it's not hard to find my stuff.
All right, great.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much. And man, you've really actually, Steve's got a question.
I just got one more question.
He was really excited.
Just one more.
All right, what?
B.O.B. fan, yes or no?
B.O.B. was an interesting take because he was the first. I mean, guy was nominated for a Grammy.
Yeah.
But I didn't know him. I didn't know any of his music. The Flatline music video he made was very, very interesting. The fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson responded to it was very interesting. It's a
lot of exposure.
A huge. Well, I mean, it reached 100% saturation at that point in mainstream media. Everybody from Time magazine to, I had a friend call me who was reading on her phone NPR, and she called me up and said, she goes, "You're never going to guess what I'm reading." She goes, because why is a physicist doing a rap battle with a rapper? And I go, you don't want to know. And but I'm a fan of his song. I wasn't a big follower of his work, but he's actually going on tour. So if he comes to Seattle, if he actually asks me to come down, I will go see him.
Hey, there you go.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for talking to us, and we hopefully will have more people coming your way with questions. Cool. And we hope that people will really just start thinking about this. It's something that I think people take for granted. I know I've taken it for granted. So it's just I think people will get smarter in one way or another just looking into this. So thank you so much.
Right on. Hey, you guys have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, buddy. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.